My golden child brother used threats to sleep with my girlfriend. I just found the horrifying reason why. My brother has been the golden child since birth. Miracle baby with a 5% survival chance, planned pregnancy, unlike me, the accident. He got a car for his 13th birthday. When he stole my lawn mowing money, hundreds of dollars, and I confronted him, I got grounded. Mom swore she gave him that money covering for him. I'm 19 now, he's 18. I moved out the day I turned 18. He still lives rent-free with our parents, no job. My ex-girlfriend Jane and I dated for almost a year. Met at the gym, fell hard. She was my first love. She knew about my toxic family and helped me stand up to them. That's why they hated her. She taught me to say no. My brother was obsessed with her, made disgusting comments about what he'd do to her. Once said he'd pull her blonde hair till it came off so he could nut on her shiny head. We fought. Parents took his side, as always. 8 months after I moved out, I walked into Jane's apartment to surprise her. Found her with my brother. My world shattered. The woman I loved with the person who'd made my life hell. I kicked him out. Then asked Jane why. Through tears, she explained. He'd been messaging her for months. When she rejected him, he threatened to spread rumors about her, ruin her reputation unless she regularly slept with him. Scared, she gave in. She showed me their conversations. She was telling the truth. I understood but couldn't forgive her. She could have told me, screenshot everything. Instead, she chose to comply. I confronted my parents. They called me a liar. My brother denied everything. They believed him. That's when I decided on revenge. I got screenshots from Jane of their conversations. For months, I've been planning. My brother got a girlfriend recently. Don't know how, but I have the screenshots. One text to her would destroy him. The conversations clearly show coercion, possibly illegal. Even if not, his social life would be over. Yesterday, I was ready to send everything to his girlfriend, Sarah. Had her Instagram open, screenshots attached, message typed. Then Jane called. "Don't do it," she said. "Why? He deserves—" "I'm pregnant." My blood went cold. "What?" "4 months. It's his. You said the affair ended when I caught you." "It did, but I was already pregnant." "Does he know?" "No, and he can't. Ever." "Jane, I'm keeping it. But if you expose him, if this becomes public, this baby grows up with that shadow. Please." I hung up, deleted the message to Sarah. But I wasn't done. I needed to think. This morning, I got a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging, or everyone finds out what really happened to Mr. Peterson." Mr. Peterson, our high school teacher who died in a car accident senior year. Another text. "Your brother wasn't the only one following Jane that night." My hands shook. What did they mean, following Jane? The phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello? You don't remember, do you?" A voice I didn't recognize. "Remember what?" "The night Mr. Peterson died. You were there." "No, I wasn't. I was home." "You were following Jane. She was meeting someone. You thought she was cheating." My mind raced. Senior year. Jane and I had a fight. She said she was studying with friends, but— "You followed her to Peterson's house," the voice continued. "Found her car there. You were furious. That's not— You confronted Peterson when he came out, pushed him. He fell, hit his head on the concrete. You ran. You're lying. Check your old phone. The one you thought you lost senior year. Your parents have it. In your dad's office safe. They've been protecting you." "My parents hate me." "No. They've been keeping you distant to protect you. Your brother found out. He's been using it as leverage." "Leverage for what?" "Everything. The money he stole? They gave it to him to keep quiet. The favoritism? Same reason. Jane? He showed her the video." "What video?" "Your parents installed cameras after you started sneaking out. They have footage of you coming home that night. Bloody knuckles. Peterson's blood. My knuckles. I remembered waking up with scraped knuckles senior year. Said I punched a wall after the fight with Jane. If you expose your brother, he releases everything. You go down for murder. It was an accident and doesn't matter. You left him to die. That's manslaughter at minimum. Who are you?" "Someone who knows the truth. Check the safe. The combination is your birthday backwards." They hung up. I drove to my parents' house. They weren't home. Broke in through my old window. Found Dad's office. The safe opened. My old phone was inside. I powered it on with an old charger. Checked the photos from that night. There I was. Outside Peterson's house. Timestamp, 11:47 p.m. Next photo, Peterson on the ground. I was standing over him, but something was wrong with the photo. The angle. Someone else took this. I scrolled to the next one. It was me, getting into my car. but in the reflection of the window, barely visible. My brother. Holding a camera. He was there. He saw everything. The last photo made my blood freeze. It was Peterson, after I left. Still on the ground. But now my brother was standing over him, holding a rock. The timestamp, 11:52 p.m. Peterson's official time of death, 11:53 p.m. I didn't kill Peterson. My brother did. And he's been framing me for it ever since. My phone buzzed. Text from my brother. Saw you enter the house. You found the photos. Good. Now you know why you'll never expose me. But here's what you don't know. Jane isn't pregnant with my baby. She's pregnant with Peterson's. From before he died. I've been protecting her secret, too. We all have blood on our hands, brother. The question is, whose blood matters most? I heard a car pull up. My parents were home. I stood frozen in my dad's office, the old phone still in my hand. The car doors slammed outside. Keys jingled. My mom's voice said something I couldn't make out. I shoved the phone deep into my jacket pocket and moved fast toward the window. The front door opened downstairs. Footsteps in the hallway. I climbed through the window frame, trying not to make noise. My foot caught on the sill, and I nearly fell but grabbed the edge. I dropped to the ground outside and ran low along the side of the house. Their voices carried through the walls now, talking about groceries or dinner or something normal. I sprinted down the street to where I'd parked my car 3 blocks away. My hands shook so bad I dropped my keys twice, trying to get them in the ignition. The engine started and I pulled away, checking the mirror every 2 seconds to see if anyone followed. I drove across town to a coffee shop parking lot near the mall, sat in my car with the engine off, pulled out the phone again. My fingers left sweat marks on the screen as I scrolled through the photos one more time. The timestamps told the whole story. 11:47 p.m., me standing over Peterson on the ground. 11:49 p.m., me getting in my car. 11:52 p.m., my brother standing over Peterson with a rock raised. The angle of that last photo was clear. Someone else took it. My brother had help that night. Or maybe he set up a camera. Either way, the evidence was right here. Peterson died at 11:53 p.m. according to the official report. 1 minute after that photo. My brother killed him. Not me. I left Peterson alive. Hurt, yeah. Bleeding from where he hit his head. But alive. My brother finished it. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. Text from my brother. Where are you? Another buzz. We need to talk. Another. I know you found the phone. I turned my phone face down and ignored it. Who was the unknown caller? How did they know about the photos? How did they know the combination to the safe? The voice on the phone said they knew the truth. But what truth? That my brother killed Peterson? Or something else? My head hurt trying to figure it out. I needed to talk to someone. Someone who already knew part of this mess. I called Jane. She picked up on the first ring. Her voice came out tight and scared. Did he contact you about the pregnancy? I blinked. What? She took a shaky breath. Your brother. Did he tell you I lied? My stomach dropped. Jane, what are you talking about? She started crying. I'm not pregnant. I never was. He made me tell you that. He said if I didn't stop you from exposing him, he'd hurt me. Really hurt me this time. So I lied about being pregnant to make you back off. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. That son of a bitch! Jane sobbed into the phone. I'm so sorry. I've been so scared. He keeps showing up at my apartment. He sends me these texts about what he'll do if I talk to anyone. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I just want this to be over. I told her to breathe. Told her I had something important to show her. Something that changed everything. I found proof, I said. Real proof that he killed Peterson. Photos with timestamps. Evidence that could put him away. Jane went quiet for a second. Then she started crying harder, but different. Like relief. Oh my God. Really? I told her yes. Told her about the phone in the safe. About the photos showing my brother with the rock. About how I didn't kill Peterson after all. You have to go to the police, Jane said. Her voice got stronger. Right now. Before he finds out you have this. He's dangerous. More dangerous than we thought. I knew she was right. But going to the police meant admitting I shoved Peterson that night. Meant explaining why I ran. Meant my parents would know I broke into their house. Jane kept talking. Please. He's going to hurt someone else. Maybe me. Maybe you. Maybe his new girlfriend. He has to be stopped. I promised her I'd figure something out. Told her to lock her doors and not answer if he came by. She said okay and hung up. I sat in the parking lot for another hour just thinking. The sun started going down. My phone kept buzzing with texts from my brother. I didn't read them. Around 6 p.m., I remembered something. There was a business card in the safe with the phone. I pulled it out of my pocket. Winston Baldwin, attorney at law. A local number. I dialed it. A man answered. Baldwin Law Office. I asked if Winston was available. Speaking. I took a breath. My name is, well, this is about Mr. De Peterson. Silence on the other end. Then Winston cleared his throat. I think we should meet. Tonight, if possible. Where are you? I told him the coffee shop. He said he'd be there in 20 minutes. Winston showed up in a nice car wearing a suit, even though it was evening. He was maybe 50, gray hair, serious face. We sat in his car instead of going inside. He looked at me for a long time before speaking. You're the older son. I nodded. How do you know about Peterson? He folded his hands. Your parents came to me 5 years ago, right after it happened. Your brother told them what he did. They wanted legal advice. My heart pounded. What did he tell them? Winston shook his head. I can't share everything because of attorney-client privilege. But I can tell you this. I refuse to help them cover anything up. They paid me a retainer to keep me from talking, but I never helped them hide evidence or lie to police. I pulled out the old phone and showed him the photos. Winston studied each one carefully. His jaw got tight. Where did you find this? I explained about the safe, about the anonymous call, about everything. Winston handed the phone back. I've been waiting for someone to come forward. For 5 years. I couldn't ethically reveal what I knew because your parents are my clients. But if someone else brought evidence, if someone else wanted to tell the truth, then I could help. He looked at me. Your brother confessed to your parents that he followed you that night, that he saw you confront Peterson, that he waited until you left and then he finished it. He told them he did it to protect you, to make sure Peterson couldn't press charges against you for assault. That's bullshit, I said. He did it because he's a psycho. Winston nodded slowly. I agree, but your parents believed him, or wanted to believe him. They've been protecting him ever since. The favoritism, the money, all of it. They thought they were protecting both of you. I felt sick. All those years of feeling like the family screw-up. All those times they chose him over me. It was guilt. They knew what he was, and they couldn't face it. Winston kept talking. If you want to go to the police, I'll help you. But you need to understand something. You'll have to admit to the initial confrontation. Assault charges are possible. Leaving the scene. Maybe more. But with these photos and your cooperation, the focus will shift to your brother. He's the one who committed murder. I asked him what would happen to my parents. Winston said that depended on what they knew and when. If they helped cover up a murder, they could face charges too. But if they just stayed quiet out of fear or denial, that was different. The important thing, he said, is stopping your brother before he hurts anyone else. From what you've told me about Jane, about his behavior, this isn't over. People like him don't stop on their own. I knew he was right. I looked at the photos one more time. My brother standing over Peterson with that rock. The timestamp proving everything. Okay, I said. Let's do it. Let's go to the police. Winston nodded. First thing tomorrow morning. Tonight you go somewhere safe. Not your apartment. Not your parents' house. Somewhere he can't find you. I'll make calls and set up a meeting with the right people. Detectives who handle cold cases. This is going to get complicated fast, but you're doing the right thing. I left Winston's office that night and drove straight to a hotel across town. Paid cash for the room and turned off my phone's location. Sat on the bed staring at the old phone with those photos for hours. Every time I looked at the timestamp on the photo of my brother holding that rock, my stomach twisted. The next morning, I met Winston at his office at 7. He had coffee waiting and a stack of blank legal pads. We started with Jane's screenshots of my brother's threats. Winston organized them by date, printed each one, highlighted the coercion language. He pointed out specific phrases that showed intent, showed a pattern. We worked through lunch, ordering sandwiches that went cold while we built the timeline. My brother's text to Jane started 6 months before I caught them together. The threats escalated gradually, testing her boundaries. Winston made notes in the margins about possible criminal charges beyond what I'd originally thought. By afternoon, we had 3 thick folders. One with Jane's evidence, one with the photos from my old phone, one with a written timeline connecting everything, showing how my brother manipulated everyone for years. Winston printed extra copies of everything and put them in his safe. He said if anything happened to the originals, we had backups. That evening, Winston made calls while I sat in his office drinking terrible coffee from his ancient machine. He spoke quietly to someone for 20 minutes, using words like cold case review and new evidence. When he hung up, he told me Detective Herrera would meet me tomorrow, off the record first. She wanted to hear everything before making it official. I barely slept that night. Kept rehearsing what I'd say, how I'd explain that night with Peterson without sounding like a murderer myself. The next morning, I drove 40 minutes to a diner Winston had chosen, someplace outside town where nobody would recognize us. Detective Herrera was already there when I arrived, sitting in a back booth with her back to the wall. She was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back tight. She stood when I approached and shook my hand with a grip that made it clear she wasn't someone you lied to. I slid into the booth across from her, and she ordered coffee for both of us without asking. The waitress left, and Herrera looked at me with eyes that saw too much. I pulled out the old phone and set it on the table between us. She picked it up carefully like it might break, and I walked her through the photos. She studied each one for a long time. Zoomed in on my brother's face in the reflection. Zoomed in on the rock in his hand. Checked the timestamps multiple times. She asked about that night in detail. What time I left my house. Why I followed Jane. What Peterson said when he came outside. How hard I pushed him. Whether he was conscious when I left. I answered everything as honestly as I could, my voice shaking when I admitted I'd been so angry I might have killed him myself if my brother hadn't finished it. Herrera made notes in a small notebook, her handwriting tight and precise. She asked about my brother's behavior over the years, the favoritism from my parents, the stolen money, his obsession with Jane. I told her about the disgusting comments he made, the way he always got away with everything. She asked if I thought he was capable of murder, and I said I knew he was because I'd seen the proof. After an hour, she set down her pen and looked at me hard. She said the original investigation into Peterson's death had problems that bothered her. The severity of his head injuries didn't match a simple fall on concrete. The medical examiner noted the wound pattern suggested a heavy object, possibly a rock, but they never found one at the scene. She pulled out her own phone and showed me crime scene photos I'd never seen. Peterson's head had been caved in on one side. The damage was massive, much worse than what a fall could cause. She pointed to the rock in my brother's hand in the photo on my old phone. She said the size and shape matched the wound pattern exactly. She explained that I'd need to give an official statement admitting to the initial confrontation with Peterson. Assault charges were possible, leaving the scene of an injury. Maybe more depending on how the prosecutor looked at it. But she said my cooperation would matter. The photos proved my brother was the one who actually killed Peterson, not me. Winston had followed me to the diner and sat at the counter the whole time. Now he came over and sat next to me in the booth. He told Herrera I was willing to give a full statement and cooperate completely. He asked what kind of timeline we were looking at. Herrera said she'd need to brief her captain, get approval for a formal investigation, probably get a warrant for my parents' house to seize evidence. She thought we could do my statement tomorrow at the station. The next morning, I sat in an interview room at the police station with Winston beside me and Detective Herrera across the table. A camera in the corner recorded everything. Herrera read me my rights even though I wasn't under arrest. Winston said it was standard procedure. I spent 3 hours walking through every detail of that night 5 years ago. My fight with Jane earlier that day. My jealousy and anger. Following her to Peterson's house. Confronting him when he came outside. Shoving him hard enough that he fell and hit his head on the concrete. Seeing blood on my knuckles. Panicking and running to my car. Driving home and lying to my parents about punching a wall. I admitted I'd been scared and selfish. I admitted I should have called for help instead of running. I admitted I'd lived with guilt for 5 years thinking I might have killed him. But I also explained I didn't know my brother had followed me. Didn't know he'd waited until I left and then finished what I started. Didn't know he'd been using it as leverage against my entire family. Herrera asked questions that made me face things I'd tried not to think about. Whether I'd wanted Peterson dead. Whether I'd gone there planning to hurt him. Whether I'd ever told anyone the truth. I answered everything honestly, my voice breaking when I described the moment I found those photos and realized my brother had let me believe I was a murderer for 5 years. When we finished, Winston walked me out to my car. Then he said I'd done the right thing and the hard part was over. But I knew it wasn't. The hard part was watching what came next. 2 days later, I parked down the street from my parents' house and watched police vehicles arrive. Detective Herrera had gotten her warrant. Officers in uniform surrounded the house. My parents came out onto the lawn looking confused and then devastated as officers explained they were searching for evidence related to Peterson's death. I saw my mom collapse onto the grass, saw my dad try to argue with the officers, saw them eventually let my parents back inside to watch the search. I sat in my car for 2 hours while they went through everything. When they finally left, they carried boxes of evidence including my dad's safe. That afternoon, my phone started blowing up with calls and texts. My brother had been arrested at the grocery store where he worked part-time stocking shelves. They charged him with second-degree murder. The news spread through our small town like fire. People I hadn't talked to since high school sent messages asking if it was true, asking what really happened, asking if I'd known all along. I ignored most of them and turned off my phone. My mom called 17 times before I finally answered. She was screaming so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. She said I'd destroyed the family, said I'd betrayed my own brother, said I was a liar and a traitor and she'd never forgive me. I waited until she stopped to breathe, and then I told her she destroyed this family years ago when she chose to protect a murderer instead of getting him help. I told her she'd picked the wrong son to believe in, and now she'd have to live with that. Then I hung up and blocked her number. That night, Jane called crying so hard I could barely understand her. She said she'd heard about my brother's arrest on the news, said she'd been having panic attacks for months, couldn't sleep without checking her doors and windows multiple times every night. Said knowing he was finally in custody felt like she could breathe again for the first time in over a year. I texted Jane asking to meet, and she agreed immediately. We picked a coffee shop on the other side of town where nobody would recognize us. I got there first and sat in the back corner watching the door. When she walked in, I barely recognized her. She'd lost weight, and her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail instead of the neat style she used to wear. Dark circles under her eyes made her look 10 years older. She spotted me and walked over, sliding into the booth across from me without saying anything. We just stared at each other for a minute. Then she started crying. Not the pretty crying from movies, but the ugly kind where your whole face scrunches up and you can't breathe right. I felt my own eyes getting wet and tried to fight it but couldn't. We both sat there crying in this random coffee shop while people stared at us. Finally, she wiped her face with a napkin and started talking. She told me how my brother first messaged her 6 months into our relationship, saying he just wanted to be friends. Then the messages got weird, asking what she was wearing or if she thought about him. When she told him to stop, he showed up at her apartment one night. Said he had photos of her changing that he took through her bedroom window. Said he'd send them to everyone, including her family and her boss, unless she did what he wanted. She showed me the bruises on her arms, 5 dark marks on each side where fingers had gripped hard enough to leave prints. He'd grabbed her last week when she said she couldn't see him anymore, told her she didn't get to decide when they were done. The marks were starting to turn yellow at the edges, but still looked painful. I wanted to kill him all over again. Detective Herrera called me the next day, asking if Jane would be willing to give a statement. I told her I'd ask, but couldn't promise anything. Jane surprised me by saying yes immediately. She said she was done being scared and wanted my brother to pay for everything he'd done. We met at the police station, and Herrera took Jane into an interview room for 3 hours. When they came out, Jane looked exhausted, but also lighter somehow, like she'd been carrying something heavy and finally put it down. Herrera told me Jane had provided months of threatening messages my brother sent, detailed descriptions of multiple assaults, and a timeline that matched up with other evidence they'd found. The prosecutor was adding charges of coercion and sexual assault to my brother's case. Each charge carried serious prison time. Jane hugged me before she left and whispered thank you in my ear. I didn't know what to say, so I just hugged her back. My parents hired some expensive lawyer from the city to defend my brother. His name was on billboards all over town advertising his big wins in criminal cases. Winston called me 2 days later, sounding tired and annoyed. Never! He told me the defense attorney was already trying to flip the whole case, claiming I was the real killer who framed my innocent brother out of jealousy and spite. The lawyer planned to argue that I manipulated evidence and convinced Jane to lie because I wanted revenge for my brother dating her. Winston said it was a desperate strategy, but juries can be unpredictable. He warned me things were going to get ugly before they got better. The defense would attack my character, bring up every mistake I'd ever made, try to paint me as an angry, violent person capable of murder. I needed to be ready for people to believe the worst about me. A few days later, I got a Facebook message from someone I hadn't thought about in years. Lewis Hunt had been my brother's best friend all through high school. They were inseparable until Lewis went to college out of state and they lost touch. His message said he had information about Peterson's death and we needed to talk. I was suspicious, but agreed to meet him at a bar downtown. He was already there when I arrived, nursing a beer and looking nervous. He didn't waste time with small talk. He told me that the week after Peterson died, my brother had bragged to him about finishing what I started. Lewis thought he was just talking tough about a fight, the way teenage guys do when they want to sound dangerous. My brother said Peterson deserved what he got for messing with his family. At the time, Lewis figured it meant Peterson had given one of us a bad grade or something. He never connected it to the teacher's death until he saw the news about my brother's arrest. Now all those weird comments made horrible sense. Lewis felt guilty for not saying something sooner, but he genuinely thought it was just my brother being dramatic. He told me other stuff too, things that showed a pattern. My brother had killed a neighbor's cat in middle school and laughed about it. He'd beaten up a kid at the school so badly the kid needed stitches, and my parents paid the family to not press charges. He'd threatened a girl who rejected him at a party, following her home and leaving dead flowers on her doorstep for weeks. Lewis said he'd always known something was wrong with my brother, but their friendship and his loyalty kept him from seeing how bad it really was. He asked if I wanted him to talk to the police. I said yes, and gave him Detective Herrera's number. He called her right there from the bar and set up an appointment to give an official statement. When we left, he apologized for not speaking up sooner, and I told him he was speaking up now, and that's what mattered. The medical examiner's office called Winston a week later with new findings. They'd reviewed Peterson's original autopsy report with the new evidence from the photos. The fatal blow to Peterson's head came from a rock that matched the one in the picture of my brother. The injury pattern and depth proved it was delivered with significant force at least 5 minutes after the initial injuries from his fall. The timeline was clear. I'd pushed Peterson. He fell and hit his head. I left. 5 minutes later, my brother arrived and finished killing him with the rock. The medical examiner's report proved I'd already left when the killing blow happened. My initial confrontation had caused injuries, but not death. My brother's actions caused death. The distinction mattered legally, and it mattered to me even though I still felt guilty about starting the whole thing. Winston set up a meeting with the prosecutor to go over everything. We met at the DA's office in a conference room with terrible fluorescent lights that made everyone look sick. The prosecutor was a woman in her 40s who looked like she hadn't slept in days. She laid out all the evidence on the table, the photos, the medical examiner's report, Jane's statement, Lewis's testimony. She told me they weren't filing charges against me for the initial confrontation with Peterson. My cooperation with the investigation and the clear evidence that I didn't cause Peterson's death meant they'd treat me as a witness instead of a suspect. She said I'd have to testify at my brother's trial, and the defense would try to destroy me on the stand. I needed to be prepared for that. But I wasn't going to jail. The relief hit me so hard I almost threw up right there in the conference room. Winston put his hand on my shoulder and told me to breathe. The prosecutor said my brother was looking at serious time for murder, plus the additional charges related to Jane. If convicted on everything, he'd be in prison for decades. The next morning, I woke up to dozens of texts and missed calls. My brother's defense attorney had leaked a story to the local news painting me as a jealous boyfriend who killed his teacher in a rage and then framed his innocent younger brother to cover it up. The article included details about Jane, calling her an unreliable witness with a history of relationships with both brothers. It described her as a woman who played us against each other and was now lying to protect me. Reading it made my blood boil. They were attacking Jane's character and privacy to defend a murderer. The comment section was even worse, people who didn't know anything about the real story calling Jane terrible names and saying I was obviously guilty. Some people defended me, but most seemed to believe the defense's version. I called Winston in a panic, and he told me to stay off social media and not respond to anyone. Winston worked with me to prepare a statement for the media with the actual facts and timeline. We laid out the evidence clearly, the photos with timestamps, the medical examiner's findings, Jane's documentation of coercion and assault. We explained that I'd cooperated fully with police, and the prosecutor had cleared me as a witness rather than a suspect. Winston had contacts at several news outlets, and he sent them the statement along with copies of key evidence. Within 2 days, multiple news organizations picked up the real story. Public opinion started shifting as people saw the clear evidence showing my brother had committed murder. The narrative changed from jealous brother to family tragedy, with a sociopathic golden child. Comment sections filled with people apologizing for jumping to conclusions and expressing sympathy for what Jane and I had been through. It didn't undo the damage, but it helped. My boss called me into his office on a Friday afternoon. I knew what was coming before he said anything. He told me the media attention was affecting his business, customers asking questions and employees gossiping instead of working. He said he had to let me go. I asked if this was legal, and he said he'd consulted with his lawyer, and yes, he could terminate me for reasons unrelated to my work performance. The unfairness of it burned in my chest, but I just nodded and cleaned out my locker. Winston called that evening to check on me, and I told him about losing my job. He got quiet for a minute, then said I could probably sue for wrongful termination once everything settled down. He knew an employment lawyer who'd take the case. For now, I just needed to focus on getting through the trial. I filed for unemployment and started looking for new work, trying not to think about how my brother had managed to ruin even this part of my life from inside a jail cell. Jane and I started meeting at a coffee shop called Brew Haven on Wednesday mornings before she had class. The first time felt weird sitting across from each other after everything that happened. She ordered a vanilla latte and I got black coffee. We didn't talk about my brother or the case for the first 20 minutes. She told me about her classes and how her roommate kept stealing her food from the fridge. I told her about the new warehouse job and how my boss actually treated employees like humans. It felt almost normal until she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. She said she was sorry for everything, and I said I knew. We weren't dating again, and probably never would be, but we understood each other in a way nobody else could. Every Wednesday after that, we met at the same place and talked about the legal stuff mixed in with regular life things. She showed me her bruises from where my brother grabbed her, and I wanted to punch a wall, but I just listened instead. We were building something new that wasn't romance but felt important anyway. My parents showed up at my apartment on a Saturday morning 2 weeks later. I heard the knock and looked through the peephole to see both of them standing there. Mom had been crying and Dad looked angry. I didn't open the door. Dad started pounding on it, asking me to let them in so we could talk like a family. I yelled through the door that we stopped being a family when they chose to protect a murderer. He shouted back that they were trying to protect both their sons and keep everyone safe. I told him protecting a killer isn't love, it's enabling, and that they made their choice years ago. Mom was crying louder now, begging me to understand they were scared and didn't know what to do. I said they knew exactly what to do, they just chose wrong every single time. Dad threatened to break down the door, and I said I'd call the cops if he tried. They left after 10 more minutes of yelling through the wood. I sat on my couch shaking for an hour after they drove away. Detective Herrera called me 3 days later saying she found the person who sent me those first anonymous texts. She asked me to come to the station, and I drove there during my lunch break. She took me to an interview room where a woman in her 30s sat looking guilty and scared. The woman said her name was Rachel, and she worked as Winston's paralegal. She had access to all his files, including the notes from when my parents consulted him 5 years ago. She read everything about what my brother did and what my parents were hiding. She said she couldn't sleep at night knowing the truth and not doing anything about it. So she found my number and decided to push me toward discovering the evidence myself. Winston came in looking furious and asked Rachel how she could violate attorney-client privilege like that. She started crying, saying she knew it was wrong, but sometimes doing the right thing means breaking the rules. Winston's face softened a little, and he said he understood her struggle, even though she put his whole practice at risk. Detective Herrera said Rachel wouldn't face charges since she didn't directly reveal privileged information, just pointed me toward evidence. Rachel apologized to me, and I told her I was glad she did it, even though the whole thing was complicated. The preliminary hearing happened on a cold Tuesday morning in November. Winston met me outside the courthouse and went over what to expect one more time. We walked through security and into a courtroom that smelled like old wood and floor polish. My brother sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit with his lawyer next to him. He turned and stared at me with pure hate in his eyes. The prosecutor called me to the witness stand, and I swore to tell the truth. She asked me to describe what happened the night Peterson died. I explained how I followed Jane to Peterson's house because I thought she was cheating. I described confronting Peterson when he came outside and shoving him in anger. I said he fell and hit his head on the concrete, and I panicked and drove away. My brother kept staring at me the whole time like he wanted to kill me right there. The prosecutor asked what time I left, and I said around 11:48 based on the photos. She asked if Peterson was alive when I left, and I said yes. He was conscious and sitting up when I got in my car. My brother's lawyer started to stand up, but the judge told him to wait his turn. My brother's attorney stood up for cross-examination looking confident. He asked if I had any proof Peterson was alive when I left besides my own word. I said the photos showed the timeline, and the medical examiner confirmed the fatal blow came later. He suggested I could have come back after taking the photos and finished what I started. Winston jumped up, objecting and saying that was speculation without any evidence. The judge agreed and told the defense attorney to stick to actual facts. He tried a different angle, asking why I never came forward about the confrontation if I was innocent. I said I was scared and 17 and didn't know Peterson would die. He asked if I was lying now to save myself by blaming my brother. Winston objected again, saying he was badgering the witness. The judge sustained the objection and warned the defense attorney to move on or sit down. He asked 3 more questions, trying to trip me up, but I kept my answers simple and honest. Finally, he gave up and said no more questions. I stepped down, feeling like I'd been through a war. Jane testified next, and I watched from the gallery as she walked to the witness stand. Her voice shook when she swore the oath. The prosecutor asked her to describe my brother's behavior toward her. Jane explained how he messaged her constantly after we started dating, making gross sexual comments. She said when she blocked him, he created new accounts and kept harassing her. She described how he threatened to spread rumors about her being a slut, unless she met him. Her voice got stronger as she talked about the first time he forced her to sleep with him in his car behind the gym. She showed the judge printed copies of his threatening messages. My brother smirked at her from the defense table like this was all funny to him. The judge noticed and told him to control his facial expressions, or she'd have him removed from the courtroom. He stopped smirking, but his eyes stayed cold. Jane described months of being scared to say no, because he said he'd ruin her life. She cried when she explained how relieved she felt when he got arrested. The prosecutor thanked her and sat down. My brother's attorney declined to cross-examine, which was probably smart since anything he asked would make my brother look worse. Lewis Hunt testified after lunch, looking nervous in a button-up shirt and tie. The prosecutor asked how he knew my brother, and Lewis said they were best friends from middle school through junior year. She asked if my brother ever talked about Peterson's death. Lewis said yeah. About a week after it happened, my brother was drunk at a party and bragged about finishing what I started. He said my brother described following me that night and watching me shove Peterson. Lewis explained my brother told him he waited until I left, then walked up to Peterson and smashed his head with a rock. The prosecutor asked if my brother said why he did it. Lewis said my brother claimed Peterson deserved it for messing around with high school girls and that he was doing everyone a favor. She asked about other concerning behavior. Lewis described how my brother used to torture cats in his backyard and brag about it. He talked about my brother's obsession with Jane and how he said he'd have her one way or another. He mentioned my brother shoplifting and blaming other kids who got in trouble for it. The prosecution spent an hour building a picture of someone who enjoyed hurting others and felt no guilt. By the end, even my brother's lawyer looked uncomfortable. The judge took a 15-minute break, then came back to announce her ruling. She said based on the evidence presented, including the photographic timeline, the medical examiner's findings, and witness testimony, there was sufficient evidence for trial on all charges. She listed them out loud: second-degree murder, sexual coercion, and assault. My brother's lawyer asked for bail, saying his client had strong family ties and no prior criminal record. The prosecutor argued he was a flight risk and a danger to witnesses, especially Jane and me. The judge agreed with the prosecution. She said given the severity of the charges and credible threats to witnesses, my brother would remain in custody without bail until trial. My brother's face went red, and he started to stand up, but his lawyer pulled him back down. The judge set a trial date for 4 months away and dismissed us. I walked out of the courthouse feeling like I could finally breathe. I started seeing a therapist named Bianca 2 weeks after the hearing. Winston recommended her, saying she worked with people dealing with family trauma. Her office was in a quiet building with plants everywhere and soft music playing. She had kind eyes and didn't push me to talk before I was ready. I told her about the guilt I felt for shoving Peterson even though I didn't kill him. I explained how I kept replaying that moment, wondering if I'd just driven away without confronting him, he'd still be alive. She listened without judging and asked questions that made me think deeper. We talked about my brother and my parents and how growing up in that house messed me up. She said trauma changes how our brains work, and I'd been living in survival mode my whole childhood. She gave me exercises for managing anxiety and guilt. Each session helped a little, even though the heavy feelings didn't go away. Bianca explained something important during our 4th session that stuck with me. She said I was having a normal response to an abnormal situation. She told me the guilt I felt about shoving Peterson was separate from responsibility for his death. I made a bad choice in anger, but my brother made an evil choice to murder someone. She said I didn't cause Peterson's death by confronting him any more than Peterson caused his own death by coming outside. My brother chose to kill him, and that choice belonged to my brother alone. The distinction made sense in my head, but my heart still felt heavy with it. She said that was okay too, and feelings don't follow logic. We'd keep working on it together. I left her office that day feeling a tiny bit lighter, even though I knew the guilt would probably never fully disappear. 3 weeks after my 4th session with Bianca, Winston called and said my mom wanted to meet. He asked if I'd consider coming to his office where he could be there as a neutral person between us. I sat on my couch staring at my phone after we hung up, trying to decide if I could handle being in the same room as her. Part of me wanted to tell Winston no and keep the distance I'd built over the past months. But another part needed to hear what she had to say, even if it hurt. I texted Winston back and agreed to meet the following Tuesday at 2 in the afternoon. The days leading up to it dragged by slowly while my stomach stayed twisted in knots. I barely slept Monday night, running through possible conversations in my head and trying to prepare myself for whatever she might say. Tuesday afternoon, I drove to Winston's office building downtown and parked in the lot behind it. My hands shook as I walked through the lobby and took the elevator to the 3rd floor. The receptionist smiled and told me to go straight back to the conference room. I pushed open the door and found Mom already sitting at the long table with Winston across from her. She looked smaller than I remembered, her face tired and her eyes red like she'd been crying for days. Winston stood and shook my hand, then gestured for me to sit at the end of the table between them. Nobody spoke for a long moment while I stared at the wood grain pattern and tried to steady my breathing. Mom broke the silence first. Her voice came out shaky and broken as she started apologizing for everything she'd done over the years. She cried while talking about how she'd always favored my brother because he was her miracle baby, and she felt like she owed him everything for surviving. She admitted she knew something was wrong with him even when he was young, the way he hurt animals and lied without any guilt showing on his face. But she couldn't accept that her miracle child was capable of real evil, so she made excuses and covered for him and chose to believe his lies over the truth. She said she knew about Peterson's murder within weeks of it happening because my brother told her, bragging about how he'd protected the family by making sure Peterson could never tell anyone what he knew. She should have turned him in right then, but instead she helped Dad hide the evidence and keep me in the dark. Every time she looked at me after that night, she felt sick with guilt, but still chose my brother over doing the right thing. I listened without interrupting while she talked, watching tears run down her face and drip onto the table. When she finally stopped and just sat there crying, I took a deep breath and told her the truth. Her apology didn't fix anything or bring Peterson back to life. It didn't erase the years of favoritism or the damage she'd caused by choosing my brother over me again and again. But I appreciated her finally being honest instead of making more excuses. We weren't okay, and might never be okay, but at least the truth was out in the open between us now. She nodded and wiped her eyes, then asked if we could maybe try to build something new over time. I said maybe, but I needed space and she had to respect that I wasn't ready to forgive yet. Winston cleared his throat and suggested we end the meeting there since we'd made good progress. Mom stood up and reached toward me like she wanted a hug, but I stepped back and she dropped her hand. I walked out of the conference room feeling drained but also lighter somehow, like a weight I'd been carrying had shifted even if it hadn't disappeared completely. 2 weeks later, Winston called again with news about my dad. He said Dad refused to apologize or even meet with me, insisting the evidence against my brother was just circumstantial and the police had rushed to judgment. Dad was still supporting my brother completely and visiting him in jail every week, bringing him commissary money and telling him to stay strong. Winston's voice got quieter when he told me the next part. Mom had filed for separation and moved out of the house into a small apartment across town. She'd finally chosen reality over Dad's version of events, where our family was just being persecuted unfairly. I thanked Winston for letting me know and hung up feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief. My parents' marriage was ending because of the truth coming out, which felt heavy. But Mom was finally breaking free from Dad's control and the denial they'd both lived in for years. That same week, Jane called me sounding excited and nervous at the same time. She'd gotten accepted to a graduate program for social work at a university in another state, a full scholarship that would let her start fresh somewhere new. But she wasn't sure if she should go or stay for my brother's trial, since the prosecutor might need her to testify again. I told her to go without hesitation. She'd already been brave enough to testify at the preliminary hearing and give her statement to the police. She'd done everything required of her and more. Now she deserved to live her life and move forward, instead of staying stuck in this nightmare waiting for a trial that might not happen for months. I promised to keep her updated on anything important and thanked her for being strong enough to tell the truth when it mattered. She cried a little and said she was proud of me too for not giving up when it would have been easier to just let my brother get away with everything. We talked for another hour about her program and her plans, and I felt genuinely happy for her in a way I hadn't expected. She was going to be okay, and that mattered to me even though we'd never get back what we'd lost. I started job hunting the next week because I needed something stable and normal in my life. The warehouse job I'd lost still stung, but I found listings for similar positions at other companies. One place called me in for an interview 3 days after I applied. The manager was a guy in his 50s named Rick, who had a no-nonsense attitude and didn't waste time with small talk. He asked about my work history and my availability, then mentioned he'd seen my name in the news. I tensed up waiting for him to say he couldn't hire me because of the media attention. Instead, he shrugged and said he didn't care about my family drama as long as I showed up on time and did my job. He offered me the position right there with better pay than my last warehouse job and health benefits after 90 days. I accepted and started the following Monday, grateful to have somewhere to go every day where people treated me like a normal person, instead of someone connected to a murder case. The routine of work helped keep me grounded while everything else stayed chaotic. I'd wake up at 5:30, get to the warehouse by 6:45, and spend 8 hours moving boxes and managing inventory. My coworkers were friendly but kept their distance, which suited me fine. I didn't need new friends, just a paycheck and a reason to get out of my apartment. Rick turned out to be a good boss who gave clear instructions and didn't micromanage. He checked in with me after my first week to make sure I was settling in okay, then left me alone to do my work. The physical labor helped burn off some of the anxiety that had been building in my chest for months. By the time I got home each night, I was too tired to overthink everything, which felt like a relief. Winston called in early November to tell me the trial date had been set for 3 months away in February. He wanted to meet and prepare me for what to expect when I testified. We sat in his office the next afternoon while he walked me through the process step by step. The prosecution would call me as one of their key witnesses since I could testify about my brother's behavior over the years and what happened the night Peterson died. Winston felt confident the evidence was strong enough that the jury would convict, but he warned me trials could be unpredictable. Juries sometimes made decisions that didn't match the facts, and my brother's attorney would try hard to create doubt. He coached me on how to answer questions clearly and stick to the facts without getting emotional or defensive. We practiced for 2 hours until I felt more prepared, though the thought of sitting in that courtroom still made my stomach turn. A week before Thanksgiving, Winston called with unexpected news. My brother's attorney had approached the prosecutor about a plea deal. They were offering to plead guilty to manslaughter instead of murder, in exchange for a lighter sentence, probably around 10 to 15 years instead of the 25 to life he was facing. I asked Winston if the prosecutor was considering it, and he said no. The prosecutor believed the evidence clearly showed premeditation since my brother had picked up a rock and struck Peterson deliberately after I'd already left. That made it second-degree murder at minimum, not just manslaughter. The prosecutor wasn't interested in letting my brother off easy just to avoid a trial. Winston said this was actually good news because it meant they knew their case was weak and were trying to minimize the damage. I felt relieved hearing that, even though part of me wondered if a guaranteed conviction through a plea deal might be better than risking a trial. The letter arrived in my mailbox on a Tuesday in early December. I recognized my brother's handwriting on the envelope immediately and almost threw it away without opening it. But curiosity got the better of me, and I tore it open while standing in my kitchen. The letter was 2 pages long, written in his neat handwriting that always looked too careful and controlled. He said he was sorry for everything that had happened, and he understood why I'd gone to the police. He claimed he'd been living with guilt about Peterson for years, and part of him was relieved the truth was finally out. Then the real purpose of the letter became clear. He asked me to contact the prosecutor and tell them to accept the plea deal for the sake of our family. He said Mom was struggling with the separation, and the stress of a trial would destroy what was left of her. He promised if I helped him get the lighter sentence, he'd leave me alone forever once he got out. I read the letter twice, then ripped it into small pieces and threw them in the trash. It was just another manipulation attempt, trying to use my guilt and my concern for Mom to get what he wanted. I wasn't falling for it anymore. Sarah messaged me on Instagram a week later asking if we could talk. I stared at the message for a while before responding, not sure if I wanted to get involved with my brother's girlfriend. But she deserved to know the truth about who she'd been dating, so I agreed to meet her for coffee. We sat in a corner booth at a place downtown while she twisted her napkin between her hands and asked me to tell her everything. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screenshots of my brother's messages to Jane, the threats and the coercion. Then I showed her the photos from that night, the ones proving he'd killed Peterson. Her face went pale and then red as she scrolled through everything, her hands starting to shake. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes and asked how she could have been so stupid. I told her she wasn't stupid. My brother was just good at hiding who he really was. He'd fooled our entire family for years, making us all believe he was something he wasn't. Sarah kept crying while I sat across from her in the coffee shop, watching her pull apart a napkin into tiny pieces. She told me about the time my brother grabbed her wrist, so hard it left marks when she said she wanted to go home early from his place. She explained it away as him being stressed about job hunting, even though he never actually looked for work. She talked about how he'd check her phone constantly and get angry if she didn't text back within minutes. She said he told her what to wear when they went out and got mad if other guys looked at her. She thought he was just protective and caring about her safety. The napkin was completely shredded by the time she finished talking. I asked if she'd be willing to tell the prosecutor all of this, and she nodded immediately. She said she felt stupid for not seeing the signs, but I told her my brother was good at hiding who he really was. We walked to the prosecutor's office together that afternoon, and Sarah gave a formal statement about his controlling behavior and his obsession with making people afraid of him. The prosecutor took notes for over an hour, while Sarah described incident after incident of emotional manipulation and threats. Winston called me 2 days before the trial started to prepare me for what was coming. We met at his office, and he walked me through the entire process of jury selection. He explained it would take at least 2 full days to pick 12 people who could be fair and impartial. He told me the defense would try to find jurors who might sympathize with my brother or doubt the evidence. He said I needed to be ready for the emotional difficulty of sitting in that courtroom and reliving the worst night of my life in front of complete strangers. He warned me the defense attorney would try to make me look bad and question every detail of my story. He told me to stay calm no matter what they said and just tell the truth exactly as it happened. We practiced questions for hours until my throat was sore from talking. Winston made me go through the timeline over and over until I could recite every detail without hesitation. The trial started on a Monday morning in late September. I sat in the gallery watching potential jurors file into the courtroom one by one. The judge asked them basic questions about their ability to be fair and whether they knew anyone involved in the case. The prosecutor asked about their views on circumstantial evidence and whether they could convict based on photos and witness testimony. My brother's attorney asked if they believed family members would lie to protect each other. The process dragged on for hours with people getting dismissed for various reasons. Some admitted they couldn't be impartial because they'd heard about the case in the news. Others said they had personal experiences that would make it hard to judge fairly. By the end of the first day, only 6 jurors were selected. The second day moved faster, and by late afternoon they had the full 12 plus 2 alternates. I studied their faces trying to guess what they were thinking, but they all looked neutral and serious. The prosecution started presenting their case on Wednesday morning. The prosecutor stood in front of the jury and laid out the timeline of that night in clear, simple terms. She showed them the photos from my old phone with timestamps proving I left Peterson alive. She brought in the medical examiner who explained the fatal blow came from a rock at least 5 minutes after the initial injuries. She presented forensic evidence showing the rock in my brother's hand matched the wound that killed Peterson. She called Lewis to testify about my brother's confession the week after the death. She brought in experts who analyzed the photos and confirmed they hadn't been altered or manipulated. She showed the jury my brother's threatening messages to Jane and explained how he'd been using Peterson's death to control our entire family. The evidence piled up day after day until even my brother's expensive attorney started looking defeated. I watched the jury take notes and study the photos with serious expressions. Several of them glanced at my brother with obvious disgust when the prosecutor showed pictures of Jane's bruises. I testified on the 5th day of trial, and it lasted from 9 in the morning until almost 5 in the afternoon. The prosecutor asked me to start from the beginning, so I talked about meeting Jane at the gym and falling in love with her. I described my brother's obsession with her and the disgusting comments he made. I explained the fight we had after I caught them together and how Jane showed me the threatening messages. Then I had to walk through that night with Peterson, admitting I followed Jane because I thought she was cheating. I told them about confronting Peterson and shoving him in my jealous rage. I described running home and waking up with scraped knuckles. I explained finding the phone years later and seeing the photos that proved my brother killed him. The jury listened to every word without looking away. Several of them stared at my brother with clear disgust on their faces when I described his years of manipulation and threats. The prosecutor asked detailed questions about every aspect of my relationship with Jane and my brother's behavior. My voice shook when I talked about the moment I realized my brother had murdered someone and framed me for it. My brother's defense started their case the following Monday. His attorney tried to suggest reasonable doubt by claiming I could have come back after taking the photos. He argued the timestamps could be wrong, and the photos didn't prove who actually delivered the fatal blow. He brought in their own expert who said it was possible I returned to the scene. But they had no physical evidence supporting their theory, and their timeline made no sense. The prosecution easily refuted every argument with witness statements, placing me at home within 20 minutes of leaving Peterson's house. My neighbor testified she saw me pull into my driveway at midnight. My mom admitted on the stand that I was home when she checked on me at 12:15. The defense had nothing solid to work with, and their case fell apart quickly. They tried to paint me as a jealous boyfriend capable of murder, but the evidence clearly showed I left Peterson alive. They rested their case after only 3 days because they had nowhere else to go. Closing arguments happened the following Wednesday. The defense attorney gave a weak summary, trying one last time to suggest I was the real killer. Then the prosecutor stood up and delivered a powerful speech about how my brother murdered Peterson and spent 5 years terrorizing his own family to cover it up. She walked the jury through every piece of evidence showing my brother standing over Peterson's body with a rock. She reminded them of his confession to Lewis and his pattern of controlling people through fear. She described how he coerced Jane and manipulated our parents into protecting him. She asked the jury to hold him accountable for taking a man's life and destroying multiple families in the process. Several jurors nodded along as she spoke. The prosecutor sat down, and the judge gave the jury their instructions before sending them to deliberate. The jury came back after 6 hours. I sat in the gallery with my hands gripping the bench in front of me, while the judge asked if they'd reached a verdict. The foreman stood up and said they found my brother guilty on all counts. Second-degree murder for killing Peterson, coercion for threatening Jane, sexual assault for forcing her into a relationship through threats. My brother showed absolutely no emotion when the verdicts were read. His face stayed blank like he was watching something boring on television. I felt this complicated mix of relief and sadness wash over me. Relief that the truth was finally out and he'd face consequences. Sadness that it came to this, and our family would never recover. Mom sobbed in the row behind me, while Dad sat stone-faced, refusing to accept reality. Sentencing happened 3 weeks later in the same courtroom. The judge reviewed the evidence and the jury's verdict before announcing the sentence. 25 years to life for the murder. Additional consecutive time for the coercion and assault charges. The judge said my brother would be eligible for parole in his mid-40s if he showed genuine rehabilitation and remorse. My brother finally showed some emotion, his jaw tightening for just a second before going blank again. The bailiff led him out of the courtroom in handcuffs and orange jail clothes. I watched him disappear through the door, knowing I might never see him again outside of a prison visiting room. A woman approached me in the hallway after the sentencing. She had Peterson's eyes and his kind smile. She introduced herself as his sister and thanked me for finally bringing her brother's killer to justice. We both started crying right there in the courthouse hallway while she told me she never believed the accident story. She said she always knew someone was responsible for her brother's death, but the police closed the case too quickly. She hugged me and said her family could finally have some peace knowing the truth. I apologized for my role in that night, and she told me I was just a kid who made a mistake. She said my brother made a choice to kill, and that wasn't my fault. 2 weeks later, I attended a victim impact panel at the courthouse. Peterson's family sat in the front row, while a facilitator asked them to share memories of him. His sister talked about how he always wanted to be a teacher since he was young. His mother described his patience with struggling students and how he'd stay after school to help anyone who needed it. His father showed pictures of family vacations and holidays they'd never have again. They talked about the hole his death left in their family and how they still set a place for him at Thanksgiving out of habit. Hearing about the teacher he was, and the life my brother stole made the weight of that night press down on my chest until I could barely breathe. I sat there understanding for the first time the full scope of what happened that night and all the lives it destroyed. The therapy sessions with Bianca became my anchor in the weeks after sentencing. She had this way of breaking down what happened into pieces I could actually look at without wanting to run. We sat in her office every Tuesday afternoon, and she kept pushing me to separate my actions from my brother's choices. I pushed Peterson and he fell. That was true. I owned that part completely. But I left him breathing and alive on that concrete. My brother made the choice to pick up a rock and finish what I'd accidentally started. Bianca pulled out a whiteboard one session and drew a timeline with 2 branches. One branch showed my action, and where it ended, the other showed my brother's decision to commit murder. She made me trace each branch with my finger and say out loud what I was responsible for versus what he chose to do. The exercise felt stupid at first, but something clicked when I reached the end of my branch and saw how far away it was from the murder branch. I caused an injury through anger and stupidity. He caused a death through calculated evil. The distinction mattered even though the guilt still sat heavy in my chest. Bianca told me accepting responsibility for the assault while recognizing I didn't enable the murder was the only way forward. Some nights I still woke up seeing Peterson on the ground, but now I could separate that image from the image of my brother standing over him with the rock. The nightmares didn't stop, but they changed shape into something I could carry. Mom called me 6 weeks after the sentencing and asked if we could meet for coffee. Her voice sounded different, smaller somehow, like she'd shrunk into herself. We met at a diner halfway between her new apartment and my place. She'd moved out of the house 2 weeks earlier, and Dad was living there alone, refusing to speak to either of us. She looked tired in a way that went deeper than just lack of sleep. She told me she'd started seeing a therapist 3 times a week to work through everything she'd enabled and denied for years. She cried while explaining how she'd convinced herself that protecting my brother was the same as loving him, when really she'd just been feeding his worst parts. I didn't know what to say, so I just listened while she talked about the patterns she was trying to break and the guilt she carried for choosing his lies over my truth. Before we left, she asked if we could try having dinner once a month. Nothing big, just a chance to rebuild something honest between us. I agreed, even though part of me wanted to say no. We started meeting the first Wednesday of every month at different restaurants around town. The conversations were awkward at first, both of us dancing around the huge things we couldn't quite talk about yet. But slowly we found our way to honesty. She stopped making excuses for the past, and I stopped punishing her for it in every sentence. The relationship we were building looked nothing like the toxic mess of my childhood, and that made it worth the discomfort. Dad's letters started arriving in my mailbox about 3 months after the trial ended. The first one was 8 pages of him insisting my brother was innocent, and I was a traitor who destroyed the family. He called me a liar and said I'd fabricated evidence because I was jealous of my brother's success. I read it once and felt my hands shaking with anger at how deep his denial ran. The second letter came 2 weeks later. Same stuff, but angrier. He blamed me for Mom leaving him and said I'd poisoned her mind against her own son. By the 4th letter, he was making vague threats about how I'd regret turning against my blood. I stopped reading them after that, but kept every single one in a folder in my desk drawer. Winston told me to document everything in case Dad escalated from angry letters to actual harassment. Mom said he was spiraling in that empty house with nothing but his delusions to keep him company. Part of me felt bad for him, but mostly I just felt relieved he was far away from me. I changed my locks and made sure my landlord knew not to let him in the building. The letters kept coming every few weeks. Same envelope, same handwriting, same refusal to accept reality. I added each one to the folder without opening them. Maybe someday I'd read them and feel something other than exhausted pity, but that day hadn't come yet. And Jane showed up at my apartment during her spring break in March. I opened the door, and there she was with her hair shorter and a confidence in her eyes that hadn't been there before. We spent the whole weekend talking about everything that happened and how we'd both changed. Since that night, I caught her with my brother. She told me about graduate school and her research and how therapy had helped her process the coercion and assault. I told her about the trial and my job and the slow work of rebuilding a relationship with Mom. We ordered pizza and stayed up late like we used to, except now we could actually be honest with each other. She admitted she'd been terrified of me for months after I found out, scared I'd hate her forever for not telling me what my brother was doing. I admitted I had hated her for a while, but now I just felt sad about all the ways my brother had damaged both of us. We talked about our relationship, and both agreed we worked way better as friends than we ever did as a couple. The romantic stuff had always been complicated by my family drama and her fear of my brother. But as friends, we could actually see each other clearly without all that weight. I was genuinely happy hearing about her success in the school and the life she was building away from this town. When she left Sunday night, we hugged at the door and promised to stay in touch. She kept that promise, texting me updates about her research and asking about my life. Having her as a real friend instead of a lost love felt right in a way our relationship never had. My boss called me into his office 6 months after the trial ended. I figured I was getting fired because the warehouse had been weird about the whole murder trial thing, even though I was just a witness. Instead, he told me they were promoting me to supervisor and giving me a raise. He said he respected how I'd handled an impossible situation with integrity, and that kind of character was rare. The validation hit me harder than I expected. This was someone outside the whole mess who saw what I'd done and respected it instead of judging me for my family's crimes. I thanked him and tried not to show how much it meant, but my voice cracked a little anyway. The new position came with actual responsibilities and people reporting to me. I took it seriously, showing up early and staying late to learn everything I could. Work became something I was good at, something I could control when everything else in my life had been chaos. My coworkers started treating me differently too, not like the guy from that murder trial, but like someone who'd earned his place. The paycheck was better and the work was harder, but I loved having something that was mine, something I'd built through my own effort instead of inheriting through toxic family dynamics. Winston started calling me every few weeks to check in after the trial ended. Those calls turned into monthly lunches at this diner near his office where we'd talk about my future and what I wanted to do with my life. He pushed me to think about college now that I wasn't supporting my family's dysfunction or drowning in their drama. I'd always assumed college wasn't for me because I barely graduated high school while dealing with my brother's chaos. But Winston kept saying I was smarter than I gave myself credit for, and that I'd just never had the chance to learn when it was my choice instead of someone else's requirement. He helped me apply to the community college and figure out financial aid. I started taking night classes in the fall, just 2 courses to start, basic English and intro to psychology. Turned out I actually loved learning when I got to choose what I studied and when nobody was sabotaging my homework or stealing my textbooks. The psychology class especially grabbed me because suddenly all the toxic patterns from my childhood had names and explanations. I started understanding why my parents enabled my brother and why I'd spent so many years trying to earn love from people who weren't capable of giving it. Winston met me for lunch after my first semester ended, and I'd gotten A's in both classes. He smiled and said he'd known I could do it. I just needed the space to prove it to myself. Those monthly lunches became something I looked forward to, this older guy who believed in me without any agenda or manipulation. A year after my brother's conviction, I drove to the cemetery where Peterson was buried. I'd avoided it for 12 months because I didn't know what to say, or if I even had the right to show up there. But Bianca kept pushing me to find some way to acknowledge my role in what happened, even if I couldn't fix it. I bought flowers at the grocery store and wrote a note on a card apologizing for my part in the events that led to his death. The words felt small and useless, but I wrote them anyway. His grave was in the back corner under a tree with a simple headstone that listed his name and dates and the word teacher underneath. I stood there for a long time just looking at it and thinking about the man I'd barely known but whose death had shaped 5 years of my life. I put the flowers down and tucked the card under them, even though I knew the rain would destroy it eventually. The gesture didn't erase what happened or bring him back, but it helped me accept my part in that night. I wasn't the murderer, but I wasn't innocent either. I could live with that truth now in a way I couldn't a year ago. I sat on the grass next to his grave and told him out loud that I was sorry, that I'd been a stupid, angry kid who made a terrible choice. I told him my brother was in prison and would be for a long time. Then I sat quiet for a while before getting up and walking back to my car. I'm building a life now based on honesty and accountability instead of the toxic patterns I grew up swimming in. The past still hurts when I let myself think about it too long, all the years of favoritism and manipulation and lies. But I'm proud of choosing truth over family loyalty when it mattered most, even though that choice cost me my father and my brother. Mom and I have dinner every month, and we're slowly healing something between us that might eventually look like a real relationship. I have genuine friends now who know my full story, people from work and school who've heard the whole mess and stuck around anyway. Bianca keeps telling me I'm creating the kind of person I want to be, rather than staying the damaged kid my family tried to make me. Some days I believe her more than others. I'm taking 4 classes next semester, and Winston thinks Jane texts me pictures from her research trips and asks about my classes. My apartment is small, but it's mine, and nobody's stealing from me or gaslighting me about what I know is true. The nightmares about Peterson still come sometimes, but less often now. I visit his grave every few months and leave flowers without the crushing guilt that used to follow me everywhere. My brother will be in prison until he's middle-aged, if he ever gets out at all. Dad lives alone in that house, still writing his angry letters that I don't read. And I'm here, 20 years old, taking college classes and working a job I'm good at, and building something honest out of the wreckage. It's not the life I imagined when I was younger, but it's mine, and I earned every piece of it by refusing to keep lying for people who never deserved my protection.